Welcome to Category Visionaries, the show dedicated to exploring exciting visions for the future from the founders who are on the front lines building it. In each episode, we'll speak with a visionary founder who's building a new category or reimagining an existing one. We'll learn about the problem they solve, how their technology works, and unpack their vision for the future. I'm your host, Brett Stapper, CEO of Frontlines Media. Now let's dive right into today's episode. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Category Visionaries. Today we're speaking with Jason Park, CEO and co-founder of Coldcart, a perishable e-commerce fulfillment platform that's raised $6.5 million in funding. Jason, how are you?
Great. Thanks for having me, Brett. Really happy to be here. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, no problem. I'm super excited as well. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Talk to us about what you're building today.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, our business is orchestration and optimization of perishable parcels. What the heck does that mean? So, frozen and refrigerated products, think kind of food, meal subscriptions, pharmaceuticals, industrials. There are last year were 3 billion of these parcels shipped in the US, and that number is expected to grow to 9 billion by 2032. And there is not a single, this is kind of the last sort of frontier in terms of supply chain technology and software. And so the specific challenge of this space is that you can't just lower costs, you have to solve for cost and spoilage at the same time. And the more you improve on one, the worse the other one gets. And there's a very direct trade-off. And it's to the point where even the largest companies in the space have to throttle their growth. And so what we are is software platform that orchestrates and optimizes these shipments. So we have brands and manufacturers on one side. Their orders come into Coldcart. Coldcart is looking at all of the different variables that will impact cost or spoilage. How hot is the temperature? How much ice insulation do I have to put in the box? Is this carrier going to show up on time if I ship from Georgia versus Florida? And all of those determinations are made in real time. And then all those instructions are passed to a network of warehouses we have around the country and customers' own warehouses as well. And through that, we are able to lower cost per shipment by 15 to 50%. And we're also able to reduce refundable late shipments, i.e. the ones that would be spoiled because they deliver late, by 40 to 60%.
So I had an interesting experience that may be relevant here. I used to order a lot from Crowd Cow. Are they a customer of yours? Do you work with Crowd Cow?
We do a lot of meat and cow-related products, and they are one of the most difficult categories to service. We do not work with Crowd Cow specifically.
Okay, yeah.
Hopefully they're listening.
Yeah, our experience with them was, we would order every now, like a few times a year, we order, Wagyu, and it's like a fun experience for the family. And we ordered a shipment once, and it got delayed by, I think, 2 or 3 days. And then it came, and it was, not good. It had gone bad. It was just this horrible experience. And all I could think about was this is very high stakes. That was probably $400 or $500 worth of meat that we're talking about. It's very different from an Amazon order where the iPhone charger gets delayed. This is, meat. It was for a party. It was supposed to be a good thing and we didn't get it. And I am not a customer now and we stopped using it because we were frustrated with the experience. So it must be high stakes for you then, right? I'm guessing for a lot of the companies that you're working with, they need to get that stuff there and they need to get it there on time.
It is ruthless that there is, as soon as it delivers late, that's it. And to your point, there's a refund. They're trying to reship it. You only get 1 or 2 chances, especially, again, I don't know Crowd Cow, so you don't know who I'm speaking with here, but hope you're listening. But there's a very real customer lifetime value impact of this. And you're right, normal, quote unquote, is for these companies is anywhere from 5 to 10% of sales refunded. And that's just accepted as a cost of doing business. But that's just the cost of refunding the order, not all of these other factors like you just described, the fact that this customer doesn't want to order from you again. And maybe these are even subscription businesses. It's generally the case, to your point, that if it's important enough to ship frozen or refrigerated in a box, there's stakes involved, medicine or some solvents needed to run a plant or whatever the case is.
How'd you get into this business? What were you doing in your life that you were sitting there just thinking man, how do we solve this problem? Did you have an experience like me? You're trying to order some steak and it got delayed. How did you uncover this problem?
Yeah, so I think some of it, I'll give you a quick background on myself because I think it really sort of influences why in this moment I was kind of got grabbed by this problem, I guess. So I started my career out in B2B e-commerce fulfillment for a company called McMaster-Carr. So I spent about half my time there managing physical warehouse operations, so your pick, pack, shipping, assembly, and the other half of my time on software and automation projects to do those first things more efficiently. So kind of both on the physical and digital sides of that world, so to speak. Left, went to Bain and Company management consulting and consulted primarily for companies in the tech industry. This was in the early 2010s. And so the big thing happening in tech and to tech companies was the cloud, quote unquote. And the transition from having giant physical server boxes and data centers that companies didn't really understand. And they just had to have them and they cost a lot of money to a world in which we sign up for an Amazon Web Services, AWS account, and all of that is centralized in a way that's more efficient than any of these individual companies can achieve on their own. That actually comes into play quite a bit in how we approach Coldcart. And then I joined Allstate specifically to start their consumer identity protection business, took that from 0 to 100 million ARR in about 5 years. And so it's that moment kind of in my life and my career, I reconnected with a friend from Harvard undergrad, Matt, who became my co-founder, Matt Salzberg, and he had started the company Blue Apron close to 2 decades ago now, as we start to date ourselves here. And to be honest, Blue Apron was always a head scratcher for me. It's like, you're going to ship boxes of vegetables to people's apartments. Like, to your point, we were just talking about, like, is that gross? How does this make any sense? And, of course, they IPO'd for 2 billion. And so, a couple of years later, we get reconnected. And I was asking him, like, how'd you figure out the boxes? And at the time that he was CEO, there were about $1 billion in revenue. And as he described it, it was prohibitively hard. And the reason it was hard was because the way he described it was always just too much overhead, too much infrastructure, too much specialization. And, you connect the dots. That is the same phenomenon that happened in the tech industry in 2010s with data centers to centralized infrastructure. And you put all these companies together. In the case of perishable parcel shipping, yes, you put all these companies together on the same platform, the costs get better because of volume. I think everyone expects that, right? That's not that interesting. But the unique aspect of doing this for perishables is because you are trying to solve for cost and spoilage at the same time. When you put these companies on the same platform, through network effects across these companies, you are able to unlock efficiencies that are actually not available for any one of those companies individually, no matter how big they are. And ironically, the largest companies with the largest supply chains actually tend to be the worst at this, and they will self-admit that. And here's kind of an example: 1,000 companies shipping frozen product to New York City, shipping via UPS. I always pick on UPS just because they're everyone knows who they are, and they're one of our partners. But UPS is running 85% on-time delivery. Fine, no alarm bells are going off, no one's concerned. But those 1,000 companies are all refunding 15% of their sales, because as soon as it delivers late, it's dead. You cannot use the product. And so through Coldcart's platform, we would see that happening in real time, say across a couple of companies. And then for 998 other companies, we would reroute those shipments to ship out of different warehouses. We would change the carrier, maybe it's laser ship, maybe it's a regional carrier instead. No one involved in that process has to touch or do anything. And now for 998 of those companies, their refunds go from 15% to 2%. And it turns out that companies are willing to pay $2 or more, in every box for that, because that is the better economic trade-off. And that's an example. There are many examples like this, throughout the process, but that's an example of, it doesn't matter how big you are. If you're only working with your own volume, the only way you could even get the data to make a decision like that is because bad things are happening to you.
It must be a booming category. Just thinking about this from the perspective or as a consumer, like literally last night, I sent a link on Instagram to my wife. It's like a tropical fruit delivery company, and you order online and they mail you fruit and you're buying it in big batches. But I'm seeing more and more of that on Instagram, on social media. That seems to be a thing. I would guess like 10, 15 years ago, that probably wasn't a thing. Or like the idea of like ordering your fruit via mail, ordering your meat via mail, that was probably not a common thing. Is that accurate? Like, is this becoming a bigger and bigger thing in a bigger and bigger market?
So that one may actually be one of our customers. It's not the one. Yeah. So really, there's perishable parcel shipping has always existed, but from a food perspective, really, it was when Blue Apron came out in 2012 that really started to kind of create this renaissance, so to speak, or this kind of emergence of D2C food and D2C, beverage products. And, what's been interesting, a lot of people are saying like, gosh, well, of course it got big during the pandemic and, but it's going to crash like everything else. This category since at least 2015 has been growing by 18% roughly every year. And very consistently and actually very linearly, even throughout the pandemic. Of course, you have a pandemic spike, right? But that actually has to do a lot with generational and demographic shifts. Millennials now have multiple kids and, use at least one or two of these services as part of their weekly meal routine. We use, I think, three of these services in my house. And so from that perspective, you have now more and more of the kind of native audience for this type of product, coming of age, so to speak, and having bigger families. And that's been driving a lot of this growth. And then, pharmaceuticals, industrials, all those products, those are even bigger categories, frankly, than D2C food. And so, yeah, there's a lot out there. And it's always kind of fallen in the cracks between, traditional supply chain or e-commerce and, traditional cold supply chain. Parcels have always fallen through the cracks and everyone just kind of says, oh, those are the hard ones, or, those are, we lose money on those or we ship samples. And, this is the first time that now this category is getting the opportunity to monitor.
This show is brought to you by Frontlines Media, a podcast production studio that helps B2B founders launch, manage, and grow their own podcast. Now, if you're a founder, you may be thinking, I don't have time to host a podcast. I've got a company to build. Well, that's exactly what we built our service to do. You show up and host, and we handle literally everything else. To set up a call to discuss launching your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. Now, back to today's episode. That's insane to even think about. So these brands are sitting there and just saying, 15% loss on orders. And like, that's just life. That's the status quo. They've just accepted that.
I mean, 15% would be high, but it happens on a regular basis to companies. But yeah, 5 and 10% is, you look at industry on-time delivery rates for just last mile delivery in general, whatever that is what companies are refunding. And that is just, well, so the sophisticated ones will just budget for that. Just like a retail store budgets for shrinkage, that's just a cost of doing business, which is really, unfathomable when you think about it. Companies who are smaller, earlier stage, or maybe less sophisticated don't even account for it. And then they wonder why their costs are so high. And we get a lot of them who come in to the door at Coldcart, so to speak, and that hasn't even occurred to them. They've never seen that number. They've never even obviously they know what their refunds are and they know what you're getting support tickets, but they've never really connected it to real revenue loss before. Not to mention people like you who get a nasty looking box and will never order from that company again.
Yeah, that seems to be the real cost, right? Or like if I were running that brand, like that's what would make me cry is like knowing that it just cost me a customer. It's not the order. It's like the lifetime value of that customer. Like that's tier worthy.
We actually, we've quantified that in various settings, and depending on what the business is and who it is, the customer lifetime value impact of one late order is anywhere from 3 to 7 future orders. And that includes the people who have defected. So that's not really considering the full potential of what those customers would have been had they not churned out. You can't really remove that from the sample. So yeah, that's the real cost of this stuff. A lot more than just saving 50 cents on a UPS rate.
And if we're looking at the pharma side, it must be even more intense than like me, an angry consumer who didn't get my beef. This is like potentially, life and death. Is that the types of drugs that are being shipped? Like just thinking back to the pandemic, wasn't Pfizer, didn't that require cold storage to be shipped?
So as much as, I don't want to say, boy, I wish we had another pandemic. Boy, I wish that I had started this business before 2020, because this was how those vaccines were getting shipped. Once the COVID vaccines finally came out, they were shipped parcel. And, unfortunately, we missed that wave. And, not wishing for babies, but absolutely the stakes are very high. And, so our COO, Noah, comes from the pharma industry. And there is a very strong relationship between mail order pharmacy, late delivery, especially around, we're very fortunate they work for us in marketing, they worked out this year, but between late deliveries, frozen refrigerated medications, and people medication adherence, people taking their medicines. And obviously, if people aren't taking their medicines that are important enough to ship, that's not a good thing. But there's also very real impact in terms of how these companies are getting reimbursed, their access to insurance. But there's a very real, and it costs almost like a revenue cost to this that due to the nature of how the insurance works around this and the regulations. So yes, it's a big problem there too.
If we look at the revenue split, what's the revenue split between those two general buckets of like food and pharma?
Yeah. So when we look at addressable market, we kind of think of them as roughly a third, a third, a third. Pharma and industrial are actually meaningfully larger than food,
Mhm.
but they are also somewhat less documented in the sense that industrial is multiple different verticals, right? There's chemicals, hazardous, which we do, the customer shipping that kind of product. There's different types of, polymers and solvents. And, I wasn't an engineering major, so I'm kind of reaching the frontier of my understanding here. But yeah, so there's a lot more. And a third is just kind of what is readily available consensus data. And, we know there's a lot more.
What do you think that split will be, 5 years from now? Do you have thoughts on that yet? Or has that become clear? Like, do you think it's always going to be a third, a third, a third? Do you eventually see like pharma booming and that's 90% of the business, or TBD, still waiting to figure that out as you go deeper into
Well,
market?
so, I mean, we know that the D2C food category is growing substantially. We're talking about the demographic shifts. And interesting, a quick aside, and interestingly, some people say it's not growing because the publicly traded companies seem to be shrinking, but that volume is actually going to thousands of more specialized providers. Just like, I want a certain type of jeans, and so I go to a certain store for that online, and same thing. So that kind of continue to grow. I would say that pharma is the kind of attractiveness of pharma as a market is that it is highly inelastic, right? Because people have to take medications, and medications are, manufactured in, large, but I don't know what the manufacturing, but yes, people have to take their medications. And, as you go from kind of food to pharma to industrial, you get into increasingly mission critical applications and use cases. And so I think that's kind of how we think about these markets, that they do behave differently. They're all large markets. There's $76 billion worth of spend on just warehousing, shipping, and packaging on perishable parcels in the US last year. And so, but these markets each have their own kind of dynamics. It really makes for a very kind of balanced portfolio, so to speak.
Is that hard serving, such different markets? Like, is the messaging very different? Is the value prop different? Or is the value prop really similar, regardless of if it's industrial versus pharma versus food?
So we know through lots and lots of validation and insiders and direct observation, et cetera, that the need and the problem is exactly the same, because you are trying to put ice into a box and you are trying to ensure that that box survives, up to 2 days transportation, and do that without massive costs.
Mhm.
And we know that's the case. As you go from one vertical to another, the selling message changes, the groups of customers change, and how you reach them changes. And in the case of pharma in particular, you have HIPAA regulations. We're fortunate that actually everyone on our engineering team used to work in healthcare, for a completely kind of just coincidence. And so we do know that space well, but that's the type of thing. But it's incremental, solvable go to market and product, just work that you need to do.
When I did the intro, I introduced you as a perishable e-commerce fulfillment platform. Is that the market category? Did I have that right? Or what's the market category that you're in and customers are buying?
I'm glad that you asked that question, because it's funny. We get asked, so there are order management systems or OMS platforms, and there are WMS systems or warehouse management systems. And we always get asked, are you an OMS or are you a WMS? And the reality is a little bit of both, and kind of around the OMS as well, which is not a very helpful answer. But to your point, it is, I'd say, what we'll call it B2B vertical SaaS, right? We are specialized in this very particular application that exists across many different industries and many different verticals with a very specific use case. When you really take it's interesting, OMS and WMS, is even the fact that distinction exists is honestly why, starting from that level, why this problem is not getting solved. Because those boxes and categorizations make sense for dry shipping, where you're just trying to get your costs as low as possible in every single step of the process. And whereas with perishable parcels, it starts in as high level as, where do I ship from? I need to have a lot more warehouses. those warehouses need to be placed a certain way. And so this is, we've got this functionality, interactive analytics in the platform. It starts there. Then it's deciding which warehouse even gets an order to begin with based on all those conditions and based on all those real-time factors. And so you're doing so much of this work up front just to figure out what your options are. And then it kind of gets more and more into the traditional OMS and WMS spaces. And so in our case, we play nicely with any existing tech stack. We integrate into, many different OMSs, Shopify, ERPs, et cetera. We can integrate into a WMS. It's an interesting, we get asked to integrate into WMS systems by 3PLs and brands who do fulfillment a lot less than we expected, just because, they're kind of, most WMSs, again, are kind of force fitting certain functionality, to make these warehouses work. And through Coldcart, we take things down to these sort of pick ticket and shipping label level. So what actually happens to the box, we can feed that information wherever it needs to go. The WMSs kind of get into things like, staffing optimization and scheduling and how many steps you take and things like that. We don't do that kind of thing. So for a business that, had very little kind of technical capability to begin with, they actually are able to use this as kind of a WMS light.
Got it. Okay, that all makes sense. What about from a marketing perspective? What's the general marketing strategy look like if you were to summarize it?
So we try to, I think anything go to market, we try to think of it the way you think about product. So who is our persona, right? Obviously, I think people generally start there as good practice, but thinking of this as really a user journey. And really, this is still the same journey of your user. This is just their journey before they actually sign up for your product and get in. And so all of those different steps or quote unquote jobs to be done. In this case, what job am I trying to do? I am trying to solve this problem related to my, perishable fulfillment. And where am I going? What information am I seeking? And for us to kind of look at that just like we would product development and say, where can I add value along that way? I think there's a very important nuanced distinction between how can I reach this audience and how can I add value, because it leads you to different places. And we really try to think of it in those terms. And, whether it's in our marketing, whether it's in our sales process itself, how can we create value? And if we can't create value or solve some kind of a problem for you, even if it's just informational, why would you even look at our products? Well, why have we earned the right to any more of your attention?
This show is brought to you by the Global Talent Co., a marketing leader's best friend in these times of budget cuts and efficient growth. We help marketing leaders find, hire, vet, and manage amazing marketing talent for 50 to 70% less than their US and European counterparts. To book a free consultation, visit globaltalent.co.
If you reflect on the go-to-market journey so far, what would you say has been the most important go-to-market decision you've made? And how'd you arrive at that decision? Take us behind the scenes on how that was decided.
I would say that the most important go-to-market decision we made was almost to not go to market as much in the beginning. And so as some background in this space, that ultimately Coldcart becomes the fulfillment and shipping process for all the brands and manufacturers who use us, for all of the 3PLs and warehouses who are on the receiving end of this work. So when we talk about things like minimum viable product, in traditional startup parlance, the bar on minimum viable product is very high in this space, especially when we talked about what's at stake in these shipments and how risky and horrible they already are. And so out of the gate, the bar is very high to earn the level of trust needed to become someone's fulfillment process. And so, contrary to what you read in sort of, kind of traditional, conventional sort of startup thinking, that we did a lot more upfront, both in terms of time as well as, frankly, capital, to build this product kind of end to end. And we were in a paid beta mode for a very long time where we had, those 4 customers at a time. And we were, we had the foundation of the platform, but then we were really building the true capabilities as we were powering these real shipments. And there are a lot of arguments, or one could ask the question at that point, why not 7 customers? Why not 10 customers? Why not 15 customers? Should you be trying to grow all the time? It's like, well, that's the type of question you sort of wake up in the middle of the night and really agonize about. And I did for about a year. First paid data period. But for this business and this use case and this customer base, the better decision was to be more methodical upfront about how much you are willing to grow relative to the maturity of your product. And the flip side of that is that now that we're past that point, the product is enterprise grade, it's industrial strength, and our product will not be the reason that we cannot grow like it happens with many companies, just because you kind of move fast and you got to make some technical compromises and those come back to bite you in meaningful ways later. We really tried to encourage much of that up front so that we wouldn't, our product could earn the trust and that it now is kind of working in reverse on the other side in our favor.
Were there any points during that time that you doubted that strategy? Yeah, did you ever have any thoughts of like, oh, we need to generate revenue now? Or were the investors very much on board with the idea that it was going to take time and you weren't feeling that pressure to generate quick revenue?
Oh, I
For
felt
sure.
that pressure all the time. So I think the team really appreciated in the sense that, usually what happens in engineering is, someone sells something, some founders, when they sell something, and you just have to kind of, death march until it gets done in some unnatural time schedule. That this was very much, we were kind of letting the health of the product set the pace. The team like it, every board meeting I get asked, well, should we be hiring a salesperson? Should we be putting more effort into this? And, they understood it, but I could tell it's one of those where I understand it. I believe the argument, but boy, I wish we were not just doing it the way I'm used to. And now, obviously they're seeing it now. And we brought up this group of new investors as well recently. They're seeing the benefits of it. But that was a deliberate choice. That was a very significant decision that we made early on. And, that's the type of thing that could go the wrong way. That's a risk you take. And for us, it was the right risk. But yeah, absolutely. I think that was the most important or significant go-to-market decision we've made so far, was to go to market less than we could.
It's a good answer. I like that. It's different from what we normally hear. I want to go back to the start of the interview. So you had mentioned the identity protection platform, I believe that was at Allstate, 0 to 100 mil. What was like your biggest takeaway from that experience that you brought to this company here to say that, we're going to do the same thing. We're going from 0 to 100 mil and beyond?
Yeah. This will sound really strange, but consumer identity protection and perishable parcel shipping are a lot more similar behind the scenes than people, I think, would just assume, because at the end of the day, you've got a physical operation. In the case of identity protection, is that you have literal fraud investigators and analysts who are researching people's identity theft issues. That's a very high volume, high efficiency operation. You also have a very wide variety of software solutions, none of which make sense to a regular person individually, like as people understand VPNs, but monitoring every sort of peripheral aspect of your different devices and your different internet activity and such, and making that all work in a cohesive, singular solution that people can actually understand and people can actually consume. Average person isn't going to go get 17 different cybersecurity solutions, most of which are going to be outdated anyway in a year or two because people figure it out. So you got to the orchestration aspect of it is really not that dissimilar on the back end. But I'd say so. That was, I'd say, something else surprising. But I would say in terms of like, you probably even a lot like painful lessons and things that, painful like realizations. And I'd say that in that case, and I think it's true of Coldcart as well in both cases, when you're building something and you're building it very fast, people's roles change so quickly. And the things that make people's jobs hard change so quickly. And it asks a lot of people to essentially go through, what would be 10 years of traditional company progression and career development, et cetera, in 2 years, right? Because you're thinking about business that literally goes from, our case, 0 to $1 million plus revenue in about 13 months, right? $100,000 revenue year business is very different from $1 million revenue year business. And now, we're much bigger than that, and the needs are different as well. And so I think a lot of companies' traditional approaches, I always love this framework of kind of knowledge, skills, and talent. Knowledge is facts and figures and things about an industry or a line of work. Skills are things that can be taught and practiced, like using Excel as a skill. Anyone can learn how to do it if you just do it enough. And then talents are really who you are. Do you take initiative? Are you comfortable with ambiguity or not? And you have to hire for that in the opposite order when you are running a startup versus traditionally you start with what do they know? Have they spent 7 years in this space? And do they know how to use these 5 tools or project management software, or whatever? And, it's a lot harder to screen for talent than it is to screen for, can you do these 5 things? And it's also, I think, harder to kind of help people understand, what's kind of where the talents come is like the people who really are right for this and really kind of fit and grow and scale up with the business don't expect a level of constancy and expect a level of structure. And the vast majority of people starting here, because it's kind of brand new education system, expect to say, what are the 5 things I'm supposed to do today, et cetera. And so it's very hard for a company to know who those people are. It's very hard for those people to know which side of the fence they are on that. And, very talented people who, sort of said, look, this isn't right for me, or maybe they were the right kind of person at the time and then the business needs change, et cetera. And there are others who, for them, that is unbounded upside that, maybe they were overly structured in an environment before, and now they've really got the room to run and grow and kind of level up. And so it works in all directions. And that could be a positive thing, but that can also be very hard.
Final question for you, since we're up on time here. Let's zoom out 3 to 5 years into the future. What's the big picture vision look like?
It's funny. We've definitely got our numerical goals and our financial goals. And as the team will always remind me that most people don't get as excited about seeing numbers on a page as you do. So I won't go that direction, but I'll go more into the kind of the real macro, like what is the story we are trying to write? What will our impact look like in the long run? And then 3 to 5 years, we will be much further along on this than we are now. But, I keep bringing up this number about 3 billion perishable parcels growing to 9 billion because that's a lot. That's just a lot. That's a lot of economic activity and business activity. And if we do our jobs right, more of those companies can be successful. More companies can enter these types of businesses. They won't have to throttle their growth anymore because, it's too expensive to ship to the Midwest. And that lowers the cost of doing business in these categories. But what happens when you lower the cost of doing business? You can also create new price points and you can create kind of new, different product segments that reach people in different ways. So let's use the example of meal subscriptions, right? Premium category. Everyone says it's a premium category. You have to be at least $60 in order just to even be in the category. Who really needs 5 meals delivered that they can just microwave and eat every week? People who live in food deserts, who don't have access to a grocery store, where the parents are working multiple minimum wage jobs, the kids are laying themselves in the house, and they maybe got Kraft macaroni that they can eat. I think it's Kraft macaroni, but the options are limited. Right now, you cannot go after that market. You cannot serve that market because your minimum price point is $60 an order. But the more you can bring that down, we're talking double-digit percentage reductions on fulfillment and shipping, which is anywhere from 30 to 50% of your sales. So you start to open up these new categories. There's another aspect of this that, and I think this is the nice thing about our business, is all incentives are aligned for the greater good. So the better we do our job, the more we reduce spoilage. Yes, you reduce refunds, but your crowd cow shipment, that was wasted food. Every time these companies, 5 to 15% of their product that they sell is waste. Packaging, these shipments are overpacked. And the specific term this industry uses is pack it like it's going to Phoenix in the summertime, because traditionally you can't change your SOPs. You can't change your fulfillment process, on every shipment like you can with Coldcart. So you pick a packaging configuration and you stick with it. And, if only the US was all the exact same temperature and weather all the time. And so, we're reducing packaging in these boxes by, up to upwards of 20%. And that is real, excess materials waste that's now not getting used. And that doesn't even start to get into things like cross-utilization of different capacity. And, can you put more boxes on the same refrigerated truck, that type of thing. So if we do our jobs right, cost of business comes down, more people and more businesses can benefit from products that by necessity need to deliver. Part of the value proposition is that it arrives in the box, which is a lot of them, right? And you have a meaningful impact on carbon footprint and waste. And that's the nice thing about being in this business is that some businesses, you benefit from doing evil things. And so you have to do unnatural things to, kind of give back to the world. In our case, if we just do our jobs, we will create financial benefits and we will create social environmental impact and their benefits. And so that's the nice part about doing this job.
So it's a win-win-win across the board, then it sounds like.
That's right. Other than, wishing for a new pandemic, which I don't wish for. Some of our teams said, they're like, "She's another pandemic." I'm like, yeah, that's the one exception, but We're not going to do
Don't
that.
want it, but if it happens, you're ready.
If it happens, we can help. Let's put it that way. We can.
Amazing, man. I love it. All right. This has been a lot of fun. We're going to have to wrap here. Before we do, if there's any founders listening in that want to follow along with you, where should we send them?
I'm on LinkedIn like every founder, and so I post pretty regularly. And then coldcart.co. So we are very soon launching a content section where we will be posting original content, industry insights, different articles and POVs. So that will become much more of a living, breathing kind of, outlet. So encourage people to go to coldcart.co.
Amazing. I love it. Thanks so much for taking the time. And CrowdCow, if you're listening, hire these guys. I'll come back as a customer.
So next time I come on, we'll be talking about how great your CrowdCow experience was and how you're now you're a customer for life. Yeah.
I love it. Thanks so much, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Greg.
This episode of Category Visionaries is brought to you by Frontlines Media, Silicon Valley's leading podcast production studio. If you're a B2B founder looking for help launching and growing your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. And for the latest episode, search for Category Visionaries on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.